Ideas Behind Bars. This podcast is produced by InSAF India in collaboration with Nether Quarterly. Hello and welcome to Ideas Behind Bars, a podcast in which we discuss the ideas, thoughts, and works of thinkers, activists, artists, and scholars from India who have ended up behind bars for their work or whose work has been censored or silenced. This podcast is produced by the collective InSAF, International Solidarity for Academic Freedom in India, and is supported by Nether Quarterly. Since early 2022, InSAF India has hosted a closed bi-monthly reading circle in response to the growing incarceration of social justice advocates and critics of the government and the stifling of democratic thought in India. By coming together to engage with ideas and works of anti-caste, democratic, anti-authoritarian thinkers who are incarcerated by the state, we wish to support the work of these thinkers, to encourage people to read their work and to contribute to the circulation of democratic thought that educates. Why are these ideas so dangerous, and for whom? This podcast series is an outcome of the reading circle. It is an attempt to broaden our discussions and to share them with our listeners. Today we discuss the work of Shoma Sen, Professor of English at Nagpur University, a women's and Dalit rights activist. As of today, Shoma Sen has been incarcerated for 5 years for her civil rights work. Sen's oeuvre spans several disciplines. Sen has been an active scholar in the fields of post-colonial women's studies for several decades. Her articles have appeared in scholarly publications such as the Economic and Political Weekly, EPW, and the Journal of Commonwealth Literature, among others. Her writing style is accessible, but also packed full of information, with moments of great wit, but also astuteness and humility, thinking through issues of feminist solidarities across caste lines from a leftist perspective. And precisely the complex intersections at which her work finds itself has generated a heated debate on fundamental questions of representation and access. Sen's areas of interest are feminism, gender studies, human rights, literature, and so on. Shoma Sen is interested in feminist traditions that have been marginalized, such as the Naxalite feminist tradition and Dalit feminism. And her work has been a constant engagement with understanding what these feminist traditions have in common, though they come from different social perspectives and positionalities, what they offer each other, and most importantly, how they speak to middle class or bourgeois feminist traditions that often neglect these perspectives. What is Sen's analysis for our times? What are the kinds of questions she poses? Why is she so threatening to the Indian state? And what does it mean to read her work in today's context? In light of these questions, we discuss two of Shoma Sen's writings today. The first is called The Village and the City, Dalit Feminism in the Autobiographies of Baby Kamble and Urmila Pawar, published in the Journal of Commonwealth Literature. And the second is titled Class Struggle and Patriarchy, Women in the Maoist Movement, published in the Economic and Political Weekly. You can find the links to these articles and the complete citations in the description. That these are not just identity categories. What Sen attempts to do is think through that relationship, attempting to draw out the ways in which a feminist approach that recognizes the entanglements between class and caste, thinking through and with Adivasi and Dalit positionalities could be beneficial, to society on the whole and to feminist movements on the whole. The Village and the City begins with the claim that Indian feminism has tended to ignore the problems of caste. To account for this gap, Sen works with and through the writings of Baby Kamble and Urmila Pawar and their contribution to amplifying and giving voice to a distinct Dalit feminist movement. As Dalit activists from the Ambedkarite movement, Sen notes, Baby Kamble and Urmila Pawar's autobiographies are testament to not only a persistent patriarchal oppression, but one that colludes with caste oppression to doubly marginalize and trap Dalit women. I quote here, in their autobiographies, they depicted their experiences as women trapped within the layers of patriarchal and caste oppression. Dalit feminism is a new concept in women's studies, which has yet to be fully developed and articulated as a feminist theory. Dalit activists belonging to the Ambedkarite movement have themselves not agreed to call their struggles Dalit feminist. Feminist analysts have coined this term after coming to the realization that mainstream feminists have ignored caste and mainstream Ambedkarites have, in practice, shrugged aside gender. If they could only come together, a unity of the genders would actually lead to Dalit emancipation. Unquote. Sen's analysis of the two autobiographies makes two further interconnected claims. The first, that caste and gender discrimination merely take different forms in the village and the city, and the second, that even in today's era of globalization, a feudal Brahminical caste culture coexists with the so-called modernization processes. Unquote. Let's try to unpack these two claims further. The first refers to Dr. Ambedkar's message to his followers that Pawar refers to in her book, The Weave of My Life. I quote, "Leave the village," Ambedkar had told his followers. "The village will never help you progress. Go to the city." The city here represents the hope of emancipation. It symbolizes a site, certain democratic progress, perhaps a certain relief from a stultifying casteist identification, and a site where resistance and emancipation can become real social possibilities. However, as Sen notes, although Pawar's journey to city life did open up new opportunities for her to become a public voice in a growing anti-caste movement, both the autobiographies show that intersectional oppressions of caste and gender persist. The discriminations merely take different forms in the city. For instance, urban women's movements of the 70s and 80s, with campaigns for equal pay, reproductive health, and against domestic violence, dowry deaths, etc., were represented largely by women from upper caste backgrounds who were at best unaware of caste discriminations or how caste discriminations affect or impact people from marginalized castes, and at worst, caste exclusionary. Meanwhile, the majority of lower caste women, as Sen observes, were drawn into anti-caste movements and into political parties that did not have a specifically feminist agenda. Most importantly, the caste apartheid continued to manifest in Dalit lives on a daily basis. Right? The city's modernity is, after all, its quote unquote progress was not only terribly lopsided, but in fact inseparable and a direct product of the Brahminical caste culture, the caste apartheid, that systematically ensured that the networks of power, politics, education, media representation, etc., remained in the hands of the Brahminical patriarchy. The second article, Class Struggle and Patriarchy, Women in the Maoist Movement, takes up the same intersectional commitment while moving in a slightly different direction. It examines the feminist dimension of the Maoist movement, understanding its value and paradigmatic contribution to, I quote, breaking free from many of the shackles that bind women down in Indian society, unquote. The central aim of this article is to understand patriarchy in the Naxalbari movement and reinterpreting the movement from a feminist perspective as one that has been historically powered by women. The article is a robust empirical study of women's movements and organizations in the Naxalite movements of Central India, which, according to Shoma Sen, are a paradigm example of a powerful intersectional feminism that accounts for the complexities of women's positions across caste and class lines in contemporary Indian society. Quote here from the article: "As a woman comrade, I can confidently say that women in the party and army have made rapid and genuine advances, winning their rightful place in the revolution as leaders of the whole party and the people. Women comrades are not dependent on men comrades, nor do they look to them for decisions. They are part of the decision-making process. It is their revolution, it is their party, which they had built up and which they will defend, preserve, lead, and continue." Due to my reading, observations, and various conversations I've had with women activists over the years, I would tend to conclude that there has been a sea change in the approach towards and participation of women in the Naxalite movement, in both understanding and practice. First, the Maoist movement has always emphasized the link between patriarchy and class. Without class struggle and overthrowing the ruling class, patriarchy cannot be challenged because every type of class society perpetuates patriarchy in different forms. From my interviews with Hisila Yami of the Communist Party of Nepal and with women's activists of Philippines and Anuradha Gandhi from India, I have realized that these parties see women as half the struggle. In other words, they are, or should be, half the party, half of the military formations, half of the students, peasants, and workers' organizations, and half of the alternate people's power, playing a leading role in all these spheres. Another change in understanding is similar to that regarding caste, that caste and gender are part of both the base and the superstructure. Women will not get equality automatically after the revolution, but have to concretely fight against the cultural, social, and economic practices which discriminate against them throughout the struggle. The questions Sen poses in these texts and the historical and literary analysis she provides speak for a contested yet illuminating solidary approach to feminism in India. Sen questions the very fundaments of feminism in India, implicitly asking whether there has been inevitably an elitist caste or caste blindness, if not expressed discrimination in the Indian feminist movement. All women are not the same, and they do not experience patriarchal oppression in the same way. What can we learn from Adivasi and Dalit feminisms? How can Indian feminism take seriously the differences of caste, religion, class, and the fact that the problems of any group are not the same as that of any other group? If patriarchy and caste are indeed intersecting and otherwise entirely barbarous systems, how can feminist emancipatory movements understand and challenge both without homogenizing either? In what way can left movements pay equal regard to both caste and class from a fundamentally feminist perspective? These are some of the questions that Sen raises and works through in her articles. Sen's work has been, as you might have guessed, caught in an ideological sort of battle between Marxism and Ambedkarism, Marxist feminisms and Ambedkarite feminisms, precisely at the point where class and caste find themselves at a point of tension or incompatibility, compelling a choice between an Ambedkarite approach or a far left approach. Though her work has been critiqued for privileging class emancipation over the more tenacious system of caste inequality, our reading does reveal that Sen doesn't offer easy answers. She doesn't direct you to taking a definitive stance. Instead, what she does is lay out certain instances as case studies where the interconnections are evident and opens them up to scrutiny, right? To work out the complex relationship between caste and class, between Marxist commitments to class emancipation and the emancipatory commitments of Ambedkarite feminisms and Naxalite struggles. It is this sort of cross ideological perspective, some have argued, that makes Sen's work so dangerous from the perspective of the state. Like Tel Tumbre, Shoma Sen is among those at the forefront of a creative space, democratic space, which India really needs at the moment. We'd like to close with a recording from one of Sen's last academic presentations.
Taken an extract from Bhoja Tarakam, a leading Dalit activist and lawyer from Hyderabad. Bhoja Tarakam talks about the primacy of caste. I found this an interesting concept. He has been in the left movement and he has felt that the left movement has actually ignored this primacy of caste, the importance of caste. And to quote him, such is the primacy of caste that it has become a touchstone of a person's worth. Thus, caste, class and gender have become really a complicated issue, and we have seen in the history of the communist movement what has actually happened. There was a time when leading communist people said that once industrialization takes place and a Dalit worker and a high caste worker work together shoulder to shoulder, for example making shoes in Bata shoe factory, then the occupation of the chamar who is supposed to make shoes is replaced by his role as a worker along with an upper caste worker in a factory. This will be the end of the caste system or the beginning of the end of the caste system. But it never happened. During the heydays of the communist movement, many Dalits were involved in it and they were also poets. A little while ago, there was a discussion about what is Dalit literature and who is a Dalit writer. So, Narayan Surve was a communist, a Marathi poet who was Dalit. Annabhav Sathe was a Matang Samaj, that's another so-called untouchable caste poet who wrote general short stories with a leftist kind of an angle. Not the Dalit suffering and all was so much there in the prolific writing, huge amount of writing that Annabhav Sathe did. Even in contemporary India, in very radical politics in Telangana, Shiv Sagar was an ex-Naxalite who was Dalit, and Gaddar is a revolutionary ballad singer who is close to the Naxalite movement, who is also Dalit. So Dalits have also been doing all kinds of writing with the left movement, but even there has been a lot of angst, a lot of confusion, a lot of debate, people leaving, joining, resigning, and this kind of a trend has been there. Similarly, there's been a trend of this in the feminist movement. And here I can again take up another Telangana activist writer, Swarupa Rani, a Telugu writer who's associated with women's movement, Dalit movement. And I quote from the same book edited by Satyanarayan, where she's written an essay called Caste Domination, Male Domination. In her essay, Swarupa Rani, a Telugu writer, asks, which class of women have benefited from the feminist movement? For the feminist movement in India, all women are the same. But this is far from reality. This is all what she's saying. In our society, which has differences of caste, religion, class, and problems of any group are not the same as that of any other group. And further, in the essay she states, I quote, however evil the patriarchal system in this country is, the more barbarous system is caste. So, on the one hand, we know that Dalit women are suffering both an external and an internal patriarchy. There have been not only incidents of rape, but there has been this entire system of economic exploitation of women, and especially Dalit women.
That was Ideas Behind Bars. In the description below, you will find links to some of the resources we referred to and detailed citations of the books we read from. We welcome free use and circulation of the podcast with first publication credits to InSAF India. Stay tuned for more episodes on the work of G.N. Sai Baba, Varavara Rao, Hani Babu, and more. Follow us on Twitter at InSAF India for our latest updates. Ideas Behind Bars. This podcast is produced by InSAF India in collaboration with Nether Quarterly.